From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I want to welcome you this evening to a very special edition of our Homegrown Concert Series here at the Library of Congress in the beautiful Coolidge Auditorium. The Homegrown Concert Series is an opportunity for us to work with people throughout the United States, identifying the very best artists, musicians, narrators, dancers, to share their traditions with you. And our guest this evening is one of the best, as I think you all know. So please welcome for coming. Before we move on this evening, just a couple of caveats for you all. The concerts here are recorded and will be webcast at a later date. So with that said, you'll be able to watch it, but in the meantime, we would love for you to turn off any electronics that you might have, cell phones, etc., or you will be immortalized forever in our archive. So tonight, we will be presenting John Mccutcheon, an American folk singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist. John is probably best known as a songwriter, and as a simple example, his song, Christmas in the Trenches, is considered a classic and was recently named one of the 100 essential folk songs by NPR, along with Blowin' in the Wind, and This Land Is Your Land, and John Henry. He's also proficient, although actually when I saw the word proficient, I thought, no, that's well-versed might be better. Excellent. On a wide range of instruments, including fiddle, banjo, mountain dulcimer, autoharp, and guitar. But he's considered especially important as a hammered dulcimer player and has been a leader in the revival of that instrument. He's also been an accomplished recording artist, and his 40 albums have earned 60 Grammy nominations. But that's all the performance and public side of John's career, and there's another side of his career, and one that many people don't know that much about, and that's one of the sides of his career that we're going to celebrate here tonight, and that's as a collector and a field worker. In his 20s, John traveled to Appalachia, collected folk music, and learned from some of the legendary greats of traditional music, Roscoe Holcomb, Kaz Wallen, Tommy Hunter, and many others. In addition to his own field work, he also worked alongside and traveled and collected with traditional music and folklorist Mike Seeger. Most of this work is part of our archive at the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and he's promising to give us more, but I think you're going to hear a little bit of it tonight. So that's one of the things that makes this concert very special tonight for us, and I hope for you all. He will be playing music from the American Folklife Center's collections and telling some of the great stories behind those songs and tunes that he collected. So I know you don't want to hear me talk anymore. So let's get on with it, and please welcome John Mccutcheon.
Little birdie, oh, little birdie, come sing to me a song. I've a short time for to stay here, long term to be gone. Little birdie, what makes your breath so red? It's because I've been a crick after all I have been through. It's a wonder that I ain't dead. Little birdie, come sing to me a song. I I've a short time for to stay here, long time to be gone. I was a college student. A fact that might shock many of you all, because I will admit I could have turned out like y'all. I mean, I worked up to my potential. I got good grades. Then I got a banjo. Began that long downhill slide that ends you up at places like the Library of Congress. And when I was in college, I had a buddy who lived across the dorm hall from me, whose work-study job was in the college library acquisitions department. And I would bribe him with illicitly purchased alcohol to order my list of wish LPs for the college library, because we had a dearth of folk music there. And so he would order these, and these were folk music records, but they were not pop folk music. This was not Simon and Garfunkel and Peter, Paul and Mary. No, these were ethnographic renderings, stuff that only people like us listens to. And I would check these things out, and I would take them back to my dorm room, and I'd listen to them, and I'd digest them, and I'd learn every song, and I would never take them back. And eventually some angry work-study student would wind up at my door banging on saying, "Listen, you, there's lots of people who want to listen to these things." And I'd think, yeah, right. And besides that, it's expensive. You have run up $50 worth of fines and you can't take nothing out until you pay it off. And he took my records and he left me there in silence. I didn't care. I didn't care for about 2 weeks, till my buddy came up to me in the cafeteria and said they got a whole bunch of new records in. And I went over there, and there was this one in particular. Had a picture of this stern old guy playing the banjo on the front and a whole list of songs on the back that I'd never heard. And I didn't have the $50 to take it out. So I stole it. It's a terrible thing to say in a library, I know, but I was a desperate man. It was this album, Mountain Music of East Kentucky. And I turned on my little Fisher-Price stereo, and I put the needle down on the first cut, and out of my speakers came the voice and the banjo of Roscoe Holcomb of Daisy, Kentucky, singing Little Birdie. Changed everything. 2 weeks later, I was out of college, and I was sitting in Roscoe Holcomb's living room trying to learn to play the banjo just like he did, which you banjo players know is an impossible feat. And all those years later, 46 years later since that evening, here we are, and I get to talk about all the people who brought me to this moment. People seem to think that one's artistic career is some kind of a linear path. Oh yeah, John McCutcheon, he used to play traditional music. Now he writes songs. It's not like that at all, friends. This music has been the foundation of everything I have ever done. I learned how to write by paying attention to folk songs that had been worn beautiful and smooth on 1,000 tongues before mine. So tonight I'm going to take you on a little journey. Right there in Roscoe Holcomb's living room, when he had several birdie songs. The other one I learned from him that went, "I'm as free little bird as I can be. I'm as free little bird as I can be. I'm as free of my age as a bird in a cage. I'm as free little bird as I can be." little birdie, what makes you fly so high? It's because I have a true little heart, and I do not fear to die. Little birdie, oh, little birdie, come sing to me a song. I've a short time for to stay here, long time to be gone. Thank you. Hi, and welcome to the Library of Congress. You know, it's a brave man will tune every string on a banjo in front of 400 people. But the line between bravery and stupidity is a thin one, let me tell you. There will be a test on what this tuning is afterwards. In 1973, I was 1/3 of the best two-person square dance band in East Tennessee. I was the fiddle player, and a tobacco farmer from down near Newport, Tennessee, named Ralph Ford was the banjo player. He carried the heavy load. And we had a monthly gig at the Sunset Gap Community Center. We were the square dance band. Now this was my introduction to old time dancing. It was a real country dance. It was a big circle dance that went on for about 20 or 30 minutes. And then everybody would waltz, which is the point of dancing, isn't it? Holding a stranger in your arms. And there'd be some flat foot dancing, and then we would do everything all over again. There was no fancy geometry. There was no math involved. It was just an opportunity one night a month for everybody in the community to get together and have a big dance. And Ralph and I were the band. And the highlight of this dance for me every month was when Ralph, all by himself, would take his chair out to the middle of the dance floor and sit down and tune his banjo in this ridiculous tuning and play the Cumberland Gap. And there was just something otherworldly about that moment. And one particularly, Ralph was married to a woman named Lottie who did not like me one little bit because, you see, Ralph was Lottie's project. And she was doing just fine curing him of all his rowdy ways until I came along. I was 21 years old. I was dumb as a post. And I would take Ralph out, and then he would take me out. He enjoyed my curiosity about everything foolish. Now, Newport, Tennessee is one of the last holdouts for having snake handling churches. It's true. And Ralph knew that I might be tempted by such information. And he said, "John, would you like to go out and see a snake handling church?" And I said, "Well, of course I would." So we arrived at this little clapboard place out in the middle of next to nowhere. And it was the most architecturally upside down place I've ever seen. You walked into this church and the altar was right there. And you had to walk around the altar to get to the pews. Now, Ralph knew I would be interested in the music of this place because it was a good bluegrass gospel music, and they sang, and then there was some preaching, and then out came the snakes. Now, see, I had seen movies about snake handling in churches, and I always kind of thought it was a voluntary thing. I didn't expect that they were going to be handed these things out like hymnals. And as we're standing in the back of this place, and these slithering spiritual things are getting closer to me, I turned to Ralph and I said, "Ralph, where is the back door of this place?" And he said, "John, there ain't one." And I said, "Where do you reckon they'd like one?" So we went back to Ralph's house, and Ralph lived in this little place. It was a nice little place. There were 3 rooms. There was a kitchen where all the important stuff happened. There was a little bedroom in the back, and then there was a sort of a sitting living room, which is where we always played and where he put me up that night. This room was dominated by an old warm morning coal-burning stove. And Lottie was determined that I was never, ever going to spend another night in their house, so she fired that thing up on that August evening, which made me dream of the sermons that I heard in that little snake handling church. And over the sofa was that great trinity of Appalachian saviors that I have seen in so many houses in coal country. 3 photographs, one of Jesus. I don't know who took that photograph. The second one was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the third one was John L. Lewis. And I sweated beneath that triumvirate all that night, and the following day, of course, was our gig. We went up to the Sunset Gap Community Center, and we had the dances, and Ralph played the Cumberland Gap, and I came back, and it was about midnight. Lottie met us out there. And like I said, I was dumb and young, and Ralph scratched the back of his neck like he was wont to do, and he said, "Well, John, just stay all night." I did not realize this was just a polite thing to say, that he did not really want me to stay all night. But like I said, I was young and dumb, and I said, "Sure." And a look passed between Lottie and Ralph that I have been married long enough now to understand. And as I was leaving the next morning, Ralph came off to the side of my truck and to bid me farewell, and I said, "Well, Ralph, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on the Cumberland Gap. I taped it. It's in the archive now. And I'm going to work on it all this month, and we're going to play it as a duet next Saturday." And he scratched the back of his neck like he was wont to do. He said, "John, I don't know if that's legal in the state of Tennessee." Ralph's gone now, but this tune is still here. Take a little nap, 15 miles to the Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap, it ain't nowhere, just 4 miles from Middlesboro. Thank you. I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time, trying to figure out how to keep the wolf from the door. And I got hired by the Eastern State Psychiatric Hospital. Don't get ahead of me. To come out and lead singing of a Sunday morning church service. That job lasted one Sunday. Not because I didn't do a good job, but because there were people there who were good singers. There was one woman who used to play the piano in a little black church. And she filled that piano bench and she filled that church with her stride piano gospel sounds. And I would usually start off by singing a song and then I'd ask if anybody wanted to come up. And that took up the rest of the hour. This old fella got up of an Easter Sunday and sang this song. He sang, Christ was born in Bethlehem. Christ was born in Bethlehem. Christ was born in Bethlehem. In a manger lay. And in a manger lay. And in a manger lay. Christ was born in Bethlehem, in a manger. Judas, he betrayed him, try it. Judas, he betrayed him. Judas, he betrayed him. They nailed him to the tree. They nailed him. They nailed him to the tree. They nailed him to the tree. Judas, he betrayed him. They nailed him to the tree. Joseph begged his body. Joseph begged his body. Joseph begged his body. They laid it in the tomb. They laid it in the tomb. They laid it in the tomb. Joseph begged his body. They laid it in the tomb. The tomb, it could not hold him. The tomb, it could not hold him. The tomb, it could not hold him. The tomb, it could not hold. He burst the bonds of death. 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 The tomb, it could not hold him. He burst the bonds of. Down came an angel. Down came an angel. Down came an angel. Down came And it was a remarkable thing. It was a remarkable thing to hear this music just kind of roll out of people, and that it wasn't something that was solely owned, especially religious music. I was driving through, on the first weekend of October of 1972, I was driving through the Smokies, and I turned down a place called the Weirs Valley Road, and it was a beautiful, warm October day. I had the windows open, and I heard this music coming. And I drove my way to the Weirs Cove Baptist Church, where they were having a homecoming, which is an all-day meeting and dinner on the grounds and an old-fashioned old harp singing in between. And the very first song, those of you who brought your new harps of Columbia tonight, turn to page 107. This is the one that always opens as, "Brethren, we have met to worship and adore the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power while we try to preach the word? All is vain unless the Spirit of the Holy One come down. Brethren, pray and holy manna will be showered all around." Of course, before they sang the words, they would go, "So, la, do, re, do, mi, re, do, la, so, la, do, mi, re, do. So, la, do, re, do, mi, re, do, la, so, la, do, mi, re, do." And every Sunday thereafter, for the next month, I found my way to wherever the Knox County old harp singers were were worshiping. And there was a homecoming in all these churches, so you filled your belly and you filled your soul, and on the last Sunday of October they said, "Well, this concludes this season's calendar of old harp singings. We will see you in May." And I thought, no, I'm just figuring out how to do this. So I went back to this little church in Knoxville where I was hired to come in and sing for people who were not yet committed to the Eastern State Psychiatric Hospital. And I announced, I have discovered this amazing new kind of singing that has been around here for a couple of 100 years. And if anybody wants to learn how to do this, we're going to meet tonight at Helen Hutchinson's house, 2 blocks away. I have the books. And so I started teaching all these people, and they're mostly students, and it was near UT, so a lot of university professors and old hippies and so on, and they were just into it because it sounded cool. And because the harmonic structures were 200 years behind the times, lots of parallel fourths and fifths and eerie minor sounding things, and they were doing something weird and beautiful. I, on the other hand, was learning how to do this in church, and I knew there was a divide there. I worked for years going out on Sundays with the Knox County Old Harp Singers, and then Sunday night coming back to my little Epworth Old Harp hippie singers over here. And finally, they started integrating together. And then the old harp singers asked us when we were going to have our singing. So we had this little church, and we decided we were going to have our singing in this place. So I hired the people from June Apple Records to come down and hang 8 different microphones, 2 over each set. It was going to be the first that I knew of multi-tracked sacred harp shape note singing ever. And set up a safety recorder up in the balcony next to the board, and I went up there to check it every now and again, and we got to Northfield, number 15. It's a big, big zone, you know. How long, dear Savior, oh, how long shall this bright hour delay? Fly swift around, fly swift around, fly swift around. You know, it's fabulous and it's energetic. And I was so used to, at these old harp singings, have people at the end of a song say, thank you, Jesus, praise God. I was listening up in the loft. So proud of myself that it had taken 3 years to bring this disparate group together, and now they were all singing together, and we ended in a huge chord at the end of Northfield, and one of the people from the Epworth group went, God damn. Luckily, the old harp singers had a sense of humor. So in about a month, you will be able to access that very famous goddamn in the archive here at the Library of Congress. It's a meeting of the souls. I want to talk about some of the individual singers that I met. I met Addie Graham through my dear friend Rich Kirby because she was his grandmother. Addie grew up in Cynthiana, Kentucky, at a time when the railroads were being built in there. And there were two competing railroad companies. One hired entirely African-American workers, the other hired entirely Irish-American workers. And though they worked for competing companies, they partied together at night. And Addie knew amazing songs from those gatherings. And I want to sing one to you, but I need your help. Okay, I need, this is a hum-along. And so some of you go, the fifth above, or the fourth below, no thirds, please. And just keep going. And if everybody breathes at different times, it'll sound like one great, wonderful drone. This is a song from Addie Graham. We're stole and sold from Africa, transported to America, like hogs and sheep, we march in droves, suffer the heat, endure the cold. We're almost naked as you see, almost barefooted as we be, suffer the lash, endure the pain, exposed to sun, both wind and rain. See how they take us from our wives, small children from their father's side. They take us to some foreign land, make slaves to wait on gentlemen. Oh, Lord, have mercy and look down upon the race of the African kind, upon our knees, pour out our grief and pray to God for some relief. We're stole and sold from Africa, transported to America, like hogs and sheep, we march in droves, suffer the heat, endure the cold. Well, as long as we're in East Kentucky now, in March of 1976, there was an explosion at the Scotia mine in Letcher County, Kentucky. And 9 miners were killed, and 2 days later, 11 miners that had gone in to rescue them were killed as well. A second explosion. That meant that the Occupational Mine and Safety sent all their inspectors in, and one such inspector was a fiddle player from up in northeastern Kentucky named J.P. Fraley, who camped out at the Cardinal Motel in Whitesburg for 6 months. And every Wednesday night, of which this is one, I would head over to Whitesburg, and we'd sit in either his hotel room at the Cardinal Motel, or over at the Apple Shop, which is a multimedia collective over there. And it was the biggest hit of fiddle playing I got in my life. I spent time with a lot of fiddle players, but no one as long and as regularly as I did with JP every Wednesday night over there for 6 months. So I want to play you a really beautiful tune that you've never heard this before, but you're hearing it from me. JP actually wrote this tune. And he claimed to all the folklorists that he learned it from some old fiddle player up the holler. But it's nothing like any other Kentucky fiddle tune I've ever heard. And he finally admitted to me that if he told the folklorists that he had written the tune, they wouldn't have been interested in his fiddle playing. Which I can verify is absolutely true. And then we're going to visit a very different kind of fiddle player from down in Moccasin Creek in Scott County, Virginia, a fellow by the name of Uncle Charlie Osmer. Uncle Charlie was my hero. He was a left-handed fiddle player who played a right-handed fiddle, and everything he played sounded deliciously backwards. He died at 103, and he claimed that he played fiddle every day of his adult life, and it was corroborated by his grandson that he was playing the fiddle when he dropped dead at age 103, and it's the way I want to go. So here's a tune called The Wild Rose of the Mountain from J.P. Fraley, and then Shoot That Turkey Buzzard and Sugar in the Gourd from Uncle Charlie Osborne. Shoot that turd buzzard. Down the road and I met her on the board and the wind comes, she was knocked sugar in the gourd and the gourd upon the ground. But the way to get the sugar is to roll the gourd around. One of the things that I have been the most interested in all along whenever I've been learning instruments is I've been attracted to those people who sing with instruments that you're not supposed to sing with. And it's especially true of the fiddle. I discovered the music of Hobart Smith from Saltville, Virginia, many, many years ago, and he remains to this day one of my very favorite musicians, and I'm so sorry that I never got a chance to meet him. So this is a song that comes from Currence Hammonds of Mill Creek, West Virginia. He is was one of the best ballad singers I ever met. He was a lovely banjo player and an incredible storyteller. I mean, he could make a trip to the drugstore epic. And he was a walking fool. He walked the entire state of West Virginia more than once. And this is a Civil War song that I learned from him and have worked up a fiddle arrangement for. And though it takes place in this Civil War, it's really any war in which there are defined combatants and then there are groups of men who are simply outlaws out there taking advantage of the chaos for their own advantage. And those of you who read the book Cold Mountain, that dynamic plays all over that book. This is one called Hiram Herbert from Currence Hammonds. It's a sad and mournful story, the truth to you I'll tell. Sad and mournful story, the truth to you I'll tell, concerning Hiram Herbert and how he came and fell while traveling through this country in sorrow and distress. Traveling through this country in sorrow and distress, the rebels fell upon him, and in chains they bound him fast. Oh, they marched him up the hollow, they marched him up the hill, marched him up the hollow, and they marched him down the hill, down to the Cumberland kind friends and neighbors, likewise my little child. Goodbye, kind friends and neighbors, likewise my little child. I never heard buddy. Now I'm bound to die. Oh, they wrapped the cords around him and they tied him to a tree. Wrapped the cords around him and they tied him to a tree. 11 balls shot through him and then he sank away. Hiram Herbert was not guilty. I've heard great many say. Herbert was not guilty. I've heard great many say. He was not in this country. He was 90 miles away. Following that, Hiram Herbert was a fiddle tune called Cotton-Eyed Joe from a fiddle player from Canton, North Carolina by the name of Luke Smathers. And then the final tune was Ed Haley's version of The Lost Indian. So we're kind of circling around this area that I called home for many, many years. I live in Georgia now, and I've lived there for about a dozen years. Lived in Charlottesville for 20 years before that. But lived for 12 or 13 years in the southwestern corner of Virginia, Scott County, Carter family country. There was a woman from Josephine, Virginia, right outside of Norton in Wise County, by the name of Kate Peters Sturgill. And she sang a lot of great old songs, but like almost every traditional musician I know, she also composed. And this is one of my very favorite songs that she ever wrote. I found no rest for my soul till I heard that story told. Now I'm in shepherd's fold, and there's a deep settled peace in my soul. There's a deep settled peace in my soul. I've been redeemed and made whole. I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. I know I understand that deep, settled peace in my soul. not your heart be troubled so. If to Jesus you will go, and in him you'll learn to know about the deep settled peace in your soul. There's a deep settled peace in my soul. I've been redeemed and made whole. I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. I know I understand that deep settled peace in my soul. When death around you lies, and you must cross that great divide, you have Jesus on your side. There'll be deep settled peace in your soul. There's a deep settled peace in my soul. I've been redeemed and made whole. I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and I know I understand that deep settled peace in my soul. I want to sort of spend a little time talking about some of the women that I had an opportunity to learn music from. And certainly one of the giants of American music is Maybelle Carter. She was an Addington by birth. I'm gonna give out my faux hillbilly creds here and give you an entire genealogy. The original Carter family was A.P. Carter and his wife, Sarah, who was a Doherty by birth. And her cousin, Maybelle Addington, grew up right over the hill from where I lived in southwestern Virginia, in the Midway community. Maybelle was one of the most influential guitar players ever, male or female, in American music. She totally revolutionized the way people thought about the guitar, starting that first weekend of August 1927, when she and her cousin Sarah and her husband journeyed over to the Bristol Hotel and auditioned for Ralph Peer and the Victor Recording Company. Mr. Peer discovered the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers on the same day. Not a bad day's work, huh? And there was a fellow by the name of Leslie Riddle who used to play guitar down on Broad Street in Kingsport, Tennessee. He was a wonderful guitar player, and AP, so of course, hired him to be their driver. Maybelle got to the point where AP was doing all the driving and Leslie was sitting in the back seat teaching her how to do fingerstyle guitar. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I did some field work with Mike Seeger, and this is a piece that Mike and I used to play together, him on the autoharp and me on the guitar. Comes from the playing of Maybelle Carter, who learned it from Leslie Riddle, called the Victory Rag. Now, my connection to the Library of Congress here and to the Folk Music Archive started early before I ever ventured in here when my buddy Joe Hickerson was the head archivist here. And he sends his greetings. I told him when I saw him in Portland this last spring that I was going to be doing this concert. He was very excited. And if he showed up tonight, I wouldn't have been a bit surprised. But I'm originally from Wisconsin. I was raised in northern Wisconsin, right outside of a town called Wausau, Wisconsin, and not far from a town called Antigo. And I got a catalog from the Library of Congress of their recordings, and there was a recording in an album, Folk Songs of Wisconsin, by a woman from Antigo. So I had to buy it. I didn't know there was a folk music archive. And so this is the very first song I ever learned from the Folk Music Archive, and it caused me to go out and look up this woman's relatives who could not believe that anybody knew she sang or much less cared about it. And Currence Hammonds from Mill Creek, West Virginia, sang almost an identical song. Once I courted a charming beauty bright. I courted her by day, I courted her by night. I courted her for love, and love I did obtain. Do you think that she had any right to complain? Oh, she had cruel parents, I came for to know, to gather their daughter, and away we would go. But they put her in confinement and locked her up secure. And I never, no, never caught sight of my dear. One night by her window I chanced for to go, to see if she had forgotten me or no. But when she heard me coming, she hung her head and cried, said, you know I love you dearly, and it's for your sake I'll die. Then to the wars I thought I would go, to see if I could forget my love or no. But when I got there to the army shining bright, oh, it put me in full mind of my own true heart's delight. Then 7 long years I spent in Mexico, and then back home I thought I would go. Oh, her mother saw me coming, she ran to me and cried, said, my daughter loved you dearly, and it's for your sake she died. Then I was struck like the lamb that was slain. My tears, they ran down like the showers of rain, crying, oh, oh, this grief I cannot bear, for my darling's in her silent grave, and soon shall I be there. So I just mentioned Currence Hammonds, and I mentioned Mike Seeger previously, so I'm going to bring them all together right here. Mike and I shared a lot of things in common, and one of it was we both had a great affection for all those things at the sonic fringes of American music, which may explain how I ended up with the bulk of Mike Seeger's jawharp collection. Mike was a terrific jawharp. When I was a kid, there was a guy in my town used to hang down at the hardware who would go around playing this thing, and when you play this, the one thing you cannot do is swallow. So he always had this little stream of indeterminate color coming out the corner of his mouth, but at 7 I thought was the greatest thing in the world. And when I asked my mother what he was doing, I thought she was saying he was playing the juice harp. Made sense to me. Historically, these things are called trumps, but not anymore. So this is one of Mike's that he got up in Siberia at an international Jews harp convention. Those of you who know Mike, or knew Mike, doesn't surprise you at all that he would go to Siberia to go in an international Jews harp. This is one that comes from Hungary. This funky little one comes from Africa. It doesn't look like much, but it sounds great. Oh no. Oh no. Sorry. I think Alexia has some more. And this is the best harp I've ever played. It comes from Kyrgyzstan. So Mike and I had birthdays on consecutive days, and we would frequently send one another folklore mixtapes of people that we had recorded, and he was a great lover of Currence Hammond's stuff, and this comes from Currence's singing. Well, Pappy bought me a great big billy goat. Mama, she washed most every day. Hung the clothes out on the line. Well, the gosh darn goat, well, he came that way. He started eating on my old red shirt. You ought to hear them buttons crack. I got even with the son of a gun. I'm gonna tie him across the railroad track. I tied him across the railroad track. Train keep coming at 1,000 rate. He belched up that old red shirt, and the gosh darn goat, well, he flagged that train. Well, I went to the station and I bought me a ticket and I hopped on the train and I sat right down, stuck the ticket in the brim of my hat. The wind came along, blew it out on the ground. The conductor came along for to collect my ticket. Had to get another get out on the track. I got even with the son of a gun. I buy a round trip ticket and I ain't a coming back. Well, the darn fool, the old fool, I married be a widow, and the widow had a daughter, and her name was Maud. I married the widow, and my daddy married the daughter, and now my daddy is my own son-in-law. And as long as we're in Mill Creek, I'm going to go a couple miles up the road and take you to introduce you to Donnie Gum. I met Donnie at her house in downtown Mill Creek in July of 1980, and I had been referred to her because I was in a jag of weird banjo tunings. And I was told she played in more different banjo tunings than anybody ever heard. So I have to get into this thing. I know how to get into this tuning. I have no idea how to get out of this tuning. I just have to. This is the last banjo tune you're going to hear tonight. And this was my favorite piece that she played. And this is just one of those banjo zen tunes. There's not really any end or beginning to it. sugar baby now. Then all I can do, and I said all I can say, gonna send you to your mama next payday. Send you to your mama next payday, 'cause I've got no honey baby now, and I've got no sugar baby now. Well, I laid her in the shade, gave her every dime I made. What more can a poor boy do? What more can a poor boy do? 'Cause I've got no honey baby now, and I've got no sugar baby now. I got no use for your red rocking chair. Going to your mama next payday, gonna send you to your mama next payday. Who'll rock the cradle? Who's gonna sing the song? Tell me who's gonna rock the cradle when I'm gone? Who's gonna rock the cradle when I'm gone? 'Cause I've got no honey baby now, I've got no. I've got no honey baby now. I've got no honey baby now. I've got no sugar baby now. And I've got no. Butler came to the wild boar's den, Quilloquay. Well, the butler came to the wild boar's den. There he spied the skulls of 1,000 men. Quilloquay, quay, quong, quaddle-down. Well, the butler made him a wooden knife, Quilloquay. The butler made him a wooden knife, swore he put an end to the wild boar's life. Quilloquay, quay, quong, quaddle down. Along come the wild boar cutting and a slash, Quilloquay. Along come the wild boar cutting and a slash. Lord, he's gnawing down hickory, white oak, and ash. Quilloquay, quay, quong, quaddle down. Well, the butler took that wooden knife, Quilloquay. The butler took that wooden knife, and he put an end to the wild boar's life. Quilloquay, quay, quong, quaddle down. It's from the singing of Nimrod Workman of Chatteroy, West Virginia. He claims he learned that from his grandfather, for whom he was named. Claims he was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. There's probably no one in my host of mentors and teachers that had a greater effect on me than Nimrod Workman. Nimrod was born in Martin County, Kentucky, and at the age of 12, he went to work in the coal mines of Mingo County, West Virginia. Worked there for the next 42 years of his life. And when he wasn't loading coal, and knowing Nimrod, I'm sure when he was loading coal, he was also organizing. He worked with John L. Lewis and Mother Jones to bring the United Mine Workers of America to the state of West Virginia. No mean feat. In 1921, in Logan County, West Virginia, he fought in the Battle of Blair Mountain. All-out warfare between government troops and Union miners. I met Nimrod when I was, how old was I? I think I was probably 22 years old. No, 21. And he was 74. And I certainly never knew that 25 years later, I would be attending his 99th birthday party. And when it came time to give this amazing man a gift, I mean, what do you give a 99-year-old man who's lived 5 lifetimes in one? So I simply gave back to him a song he had taught me a quarter century earlier. And this is a song that is my standard for writing songs. If ever I could write a song like this one that says everything it needs to say in 4 lines and then have the good sense to stop writing, I would consider myself a good writer. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, and by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, step by step, longest march can be won, many stones can form an arch, singly none, and by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. This is a hammer dulcimer. You probably figured that out by process of elimination. It's an instrument that originated in the Middle East, where it's still popular, especially in Iran and in India, where it's known as well, India is not in the Middle East, but it began in ancient Persia as a classical instrument called a santur. It is the instrument that eventually gave birth to this instrument. If you ever look inside, you will see that every time you press a key, a little hammer strikes a string. The piano is really nothing more than a hammer dulcimer with an automatic transmission, if you think about it. It was one of the very first instruments to come into this country. came into the Jamestown, Virginia settlements in the first decade of settlement there in the early 17th century, nearly 100 years before the piano was even invented. And from Jamestown, it was an easy trip up Interstate 64 to my house. When I started playing the hammered dulcimer, I played all these other instruments first. And a friend of mine, Jude Odell, attended the Augusta Heritage Arts Workshop in Elkins, West Virginia back in 1973 or 74, I can't really remember which, and took Sam Rosetta and Paul Reisler's instrument building class. And this was the first instrument they tackled, a much more rudimentary instrument, which is, and it's more like cabinetry than building a musical instrument. And when she completed it, she was done with her goal. I went up to visit her. She said, "Here, you play a bunch of instruments. You can probably figure this out." And suddenly I was 8 years old, again, driving my mother crazy with a couple of pencils on the tabletop. And I discovered the stringed drum of American music. But I felt completely ungrounded because all these other instruments I had the advantage of finding older people who had been playing all their lives. People like Addie Graham and Currence Hammonds and Roscoe Holcomb and I.D. Stamper and all these people who had some experience under their belts. And I couldn't find anyone who was much older than I was who was learning to play this instrument. So in the mid-1970s, I traveled throughout Europe and I visited people who played this kind of instrument in their own culture. And I want to play you something that I learned from one of them. The fellow's name is Jimmy Cooper. He was a Scot. He was from Glasgow. He had retired to northern England by the time I met him in January of 1977. He had been a professional hammered dulcimer player in his youth. He played he raised a family playing hammered dulcimer on the streets of Glasgow during the Depression. Think about that. You all do not look sufficiently impressed. So let me try to put this in context for you. And I think with a name like McCutcheon, I can say the following without being completely politically incorrect. Imagine how good you had to be to convince a bunch of Scots to go into their moth-eaten pocketbooks and give you their spare change during the Depression. I remember my grandfather, Mccutcheon, talking about an incident he witnessed when he was a child. He saw his grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, pick a fly out of the top of his pint of beer and say, "Spit it out, you bastard." So are we on the same page now? Okay. Well, Jimmy was the most fabulously versatile traditional musician I ever met. I mean, he had to play on the streets. He had to play whatever people would give money to hear. And yes, he played all the jigs and rills and strathspeys and hornpipes that any traditional Scottish musician would be expected to know. But he also played cha-chas and old parlor songs and themes from the movies and on the radio. And I asked him once, I said, "Jimmy, when times were hard and you really had to make the coinage happen, what was your go-to music?" He said, "Aye, that's easy. John Philip Sousa." Thank you. Thank you. Well, before I close out with something that we can all sing together, I would be remiss if I did not pay a visit to the chief mentor, guru, my Yoda of the hammer dulcimer, the greatest hammer dulcimer player I ever heard, Paul Van Arsdale. Paul was a retired tool grinder from North Tonawanda, New York, worked for Bell Aircraft. And he had just retired when I met him in 1977. Paul was a third-generation hammer dulcimer player. He learned to play from his maternal grandfather, a fellow by the name of Jesse Martin, who in his youth had been a professional hammer dulcimer player. He traveled throughout the Ohio Valley and western New York and western Pennsylvania playing in movie houses while they changed the reels. And those of you who know what I'm talking about are officially old. And he auditioned for and won the audition for Henry Ford's Country Dance Orchestra. Henry Ford, many of you may know, was a great lover of American folk dancing and had a country dance group that he would travel around the country putting on demonstrations. And he always had live music because there wasn't an alternative, really. And because he was from Michigan, had to have a hammer dulcimer player because the hammer dulcimer is very popular in the state of Michigan. And Jesse Martin won the audition but never played with the orchestra because Henry Ford was very famously a teetotaler. And Jesse Martin was very famously not. So in his retirement then, he moved in with his daughter because he had been a professional hammer dulcimer player. I like to tell that to my kids. And proceeded to teach his three grandsons, Phil, Paul, and Sterl, how to play. And many was the time I was at a Van Arsdale family reunion, sitting in the middle of this celestial triangle of music. Paul passed away this last March, halfway to his 98th birthday. And at 97, he was still the best hammer dulcimer player I'd have ever heard. So in his honor, I want to play you two pieces, not only that I learned from him, but that Paul wrote. One of the things that I think is a misconception about traditional musicians is that they are somehow museum pieces, and that the music that it is in our archive it's called an archive for a reason. It's not a museum. It's ours. It defines who we are. It's there for us to use. And I never sat across from a traditional musician who I was trying to slavishly imitate that was one iota interested in hearing me slavishly imitate them. No, they wanted to play music with another musician. This was the dynamic that was there if you paid attention. It's the dynamic that's still up there in the archive. It's for us to be inspired and to learn and to change, because this stuff all does that all the time. And so these are two contributions of Paul's to that great music. And this is not the way Paul played it specifically, because he would not have wanted me to do that. The first is the first festival he was ever invited to. The second festival was the Smithsonian Festival of American Folklife here. The first one was the Niskayuna Folk Festival in Niskayuna, New York. And it was Paul's very first festival. And he, being an old-fashioned kind of gentleman, knows you bring a gift for your host. And so he wrote a tune called the Niskayuna Ramble. And that's the very first one. The second one is probably his most well-known tune. It's called the Dulcimer Reel. Two pieces by Paul Van Arsdale. Well, friends, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and giving me the opportunity to do this concert, which I have been so looking forward to. I have to go back and singing my own crappy songs now. And thanks to the people who made this happen tonight. Thanks to David Eisner and Art Isaacs and all the people who did the sound and the lights. Thanks to my friend Thea Austin at the Folklife Center and all the staff there who conceive of and create these events that bring us together to celebrate what it means to be an American. And these days, it's something I like to remember. We don't get enough celebration of that. And I'll be around to visit with you all afterwards. When I went off on that 3-month independent study to hitchhike around the Appalachians and meet banjo players, a 3-month study that I'm still on 46 years later, I thought I was going to learn how to play a musical instrument. Put my finger in the right place at the right time on a string. And I quickly discovered that what was far more interesting was the context of that music in people's lives and in their communities. The banjo was just a tool. And so I quickly became a lot more interested in music and culture as instrumental rather than merely ornamental to our lives. And that's been a far more interesting line of study for the last nearly half century. I ain't done yet. Let's gather in another 46 years and I'll tell you what else I've learned. But we're going to end in the most unlikely of places. I'm going to take you up to Sodom Laurel, a place that earned its name. Some of the greatest ballad singers of the United States live there. Della Norton, Dillard Chandler, they're all gone now. And so is Kaz Wallen, little fireplug of a guy, one of the most expressive and excitable singers I've ever met. And he taught me this great song. It's time has made a change since my childhood days. Many of my loved ones have gone away. Some I never more in this life shall see. Time has made a change in me. This is the chorus. It goes like this. Time has made a change in the old home place. Time has made a change in each smiling face. And I know my friends can play. See that time has made a change in me. Time has made a change in the old home place. Try it. Time has made a change. Old home in each smiling face. Time has made a change in each smiling. And I know my friends. And I know my friends can plainly see that time has made a change in me. In my childhood days, I was young and strong. I could climb the hillside all day long. I am not today what I used to be. Time has made a change in me in the old home place. Time has made a change in the old home. Each smiling face. Time has made a change in each smiling. I know my friends, and I know my friends can plainly see that time has made a change in me. When I reach my home in that land somewhere, meet my friends and loved ones over there, free from pain and care, I'll ever be. Since time has made a change in me in the old home place, time has made a change in the old home. Each smiling face, time has made a change in each smiling face. And I know my friends can plainly see that time has made a change in. Oh, you've got it now, once more. Time has made a change in the old home. Each smiling face. Time has made a change in each smiling face. And I know my friends can plainly see that time has made a change in me. Yes, time has made a change in me. Thank you. Okay. I know one more song. And this is the oldest song that I have continually sung in my life, other than Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Anybody got the Nats score tonight? What's going on? I know that somebody has been watching. I would be. Because you're playing the Phillies, is that right, tonight? Go Nats. I'm from Atlanta, you know. You all have the dubious distinction of being the very first concert that I'm doing with a brand new album, and I haven't sung a single song from that album tonight. I am just a marketing genius. Back in 2012, I put out an album to celebrate the 100th birthday of Woody Guthrie. And in 2015, I put out an album to remember the 100th anniversary of the death of the labor songwriter Joe Hill. This coming year, May 3rd, would have been Pete Seeger's 100th birthday. And so I just finished an entire album of Pete Seeger songs that are as crookedly rendered as any of these traditional songs tonight, with folks that you know and love like Beausoleil and Hot Rise and Finest Kind and the Steel Wheels and Susie Boggess and Pete himself. And that's out there for the very first time tonight for those of you who are interested, as well as my more traditional oriented songs. So, I'm going to use the newest traditional instrument that I'm playing. I was touring in Australia a few years ago, and they put all these, they sort of hired a clot of traditional musicians from different parts of the world and hired them at 3 consecutive festivals, and one was a group from Tibet, and I came home with one of their instruments. They gave it to me. And had my very first album, which is my only album that's no longer in print, not been titled this song, I would have called the Seeger album this title because I think it would have been appropriate. My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, it sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the darkness round me falls, I know the truth, it liveth. What though the tempest round me roars, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging, it sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? And when tyrants tremble sick with fear and hear their death knells ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging, when friends by shame are undefiled. How can I keep from singing? My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, those freedom bells come ringing, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. Okay. this the Library of Congress? When I was a kid, about 8, all my friends started to take music lessons. They took piano lessons and violin lessons and trumpet lessons, and the guys that ended up in jail took guitar lessons. And I wanted to get in on the action. And it really had nothing to do with wanting to learn to play a musical instrument. What it had to do with was being entrusted with something beautiful and valuable. I am the oldest of 9 children. When you come from a big family, those of you who come from a big family, you know you've got nothing that is yours. And I wanted to stand there on the bus stop carrying a musical instrument. And so I began the typical 8-year-old campaign to get my mother to do something she was not otherwise liable to do. I pestered and whined and mewed and pleaded, and finally she said, "John, I have had it up to here." She had it up to here a lot. My eternal memory of my mother is with this psychic turtleneck on. And she said, "Sit down, I'm going to give you a math lesson." I sat down. I didn't care. I was good at math. And barely able to contain herself, she leaned in and she said, "How many children are in this family?" And I remember thinking, wow, she should know this. But she's busy, so I figure I'll help her out. I said, "Ma, there's 9. She said, "And where do you fit in?" And I said, "Chronologically or qualitatively?" Number 1 on both counts. She said, "So how many children come after you?" I said, "Mom, this is simple subtraction. There's 8. And then she leaned in and she used that word that children hate to hear because they know there is a lesson forthcoming. She said, "So." I suppose that means that if we allow you to take music lessons, we have to let all the other 8 take lessons as well. Huh? Now see, when she said, "huh," I thought it was a question. But without allowing me the time to formulate some smart aleck answer, she just barreled right ahead and said, "And we don't have that kind of money. I'm sorry." And I thought, oh, this is not a lesson in math. It's a lesson in justice, which is often closely related to math. So I didn't get to take music lessons like all my friends did when I was 8 years old because of math and justice. My mother confided in me many years later it had nothing to do with math or justice. It had to do with the fact that I didn't want to take piano lessons or trumpet or guitar lessons. No, I wanted to play the drums. And my mother made a selfish decision that there were never going to be 9 children, a drum set, and her in the same house. No. She didn't want me to be a drummer. She wanted me to be a mime. But I was not so easily dissuaded. When the county fair came to our town, as it did every summer, every August, and all my friends got to go because they didn't have to wait for their traveling salesman father to come home so we could all go as a family on the weekend. They all got to go the first day, and they came back and reported to me it was the greatest county fair ever because for the first, and turns out only time, there was a sideshow. There was the bearded lady and the goat boy and the 2-headed dog, and there was just the snake girl, and 25 cents. Get there early so no adult is sitting in front of you. So I weeded my grandmother's flower bed, and I mowed my neighbor's lawn, and I had the 2 bits, and I was sitting there 30 minutes before anyone else showed up. And I had no idea, sitting in that malarial little canvas tent on that August afternoon of my 9th summer, my life was about to change. Out came the 4th act, these 2 old black men wearing these tired tuxedos, one of whom carried a feed sack out of which he produced a beat-up acoustic guitar, into whose sound hole he has duct taped a ceramic pickup from whence a bare copper wire is hardwired into a Fender Champ amp that's powered by a car battery. It's the coolest thing I have ever seen on stage, and I saw Hendrix. This guy put his foot up on the amp and cradled that guitar in his knee, and was the first live guitar music I ever heard. And I was transported, and I was positive I was never, ever going to see anything or hear anything greater than that in my life. And then for the next song, his partner sits down on the amp and plays the drums without a drum set. He played the drums on his face and his hands and his arms and his legs and his stomach, and it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen an adult male do in front of a big crowd of people until fill in the blank. And this guy was my hero, and I followed him around like a puppy, begging him to show me what he finally relented, showed me the one thing, the thing he called the ham bone. Charged me to go home and practice, and when I could come back and demonstrate my mastery of that step, then and only then would he show me step number 2, and off I repaired to the only room where, as a member of a large family, you were assured of any privacy. And it's perfect because it's got a really sturdy chair. And our room had a mirror opposite the chair, which was really good for practicing, but what was that about, you know? And you see, when you have 5 sisters, the only time you can go in there for any amount of time is like at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I would show up there and I would lock the door and I'd have wool socks on and a pair of mittens, and I'd be sitting there practicing this thing for hours. And finally, about the 3rd night, I got it. I was so excited. I completely forgot where I was, what time it was, and what everybody else in the house was doing at that time. And I was going, yeah! Woo! Yes, yes, yes! It was my mom. She said, John. And I did what any self-respecting 9-year-old would do. I pretended I wasn't there. But she was my mom, and she said, John, I know you're in there. And I know what you're doing in there. My mom died 35 years ago this year, and I wish there was a way I could tell her that what I was doing that night, I now get paid a lot of money to do in front of big crowds of people. But not anymore, so I haven't done this in a long time, so this used to be a lot more fun. My first musical instrument.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.